I'm Barbara Satin, and I'm the Assistant Faith Work Director at the National LGBTQ Task Force, and I will facilitate today's gathering. And we have a great panel. Roland Stringfellow, our Detroit participant, a dear friend and supporter of the task force, and Marianne Duddy-Burke, who is the Executive Director of Dignity, and Naomi Washington-Liebhardt, who is the Director of Engagement and Faith Work at the City of Philadelphia, and my former boss, who I miss dreadfully, but glad that she's doing what she's doing. And what we're all about today is to talk a little bit about the oral arguments that were made this morning in front of the U.S. Supreme Court in the Catholic Charities versus City of Philadelphia case, which has significant implications for a lot of significant implications for foster care families that want to be involved but who are LGBTQ, but also it has great implications for not just the GLBT community, but for others, depending upon what decision the Supreme Court eventually comes out with in the spring, sometime in the spring, I assume. So why don't we get underway? And some of us have had the opportunity to listen to all or part of the oral arguments this morning. For myself, it was the first time I've listened to oral arguments, and it was fascinating to see how strictly controlled they are and how tight to the timer that they are. And it was an interesting conversation between the justices and the plaintiffs and the defendants and the those who are supporters of either side. And so let's, Marianne, can I ask you to sort of lead off with your thoughts about today, what you heard, and your idea around the whole issue that is raised by Catholic Charities versus City of Philadelphia?
Sure, and thank you for hosting this task force, folks. It's a really important conversation. And I'll just start with a bit of a disclaimer to say that this case is one that I have been following the lead up to and working on the issues surrounding it for a lot of years. Back in 2002, my spouse and I approached Catholic Charities Boston to try to become foster adoptive parents. And we just never got calls back, but went on and on, multiple contacts, all of that. And eventually, after several weeks of trying, got a call from a social worker who took our number with her on her lunch hour and called from her car to let us know that our call was sort of being intentionally ignored. The Catholic Charities, if they registered us, would train us as foster adoptive parents because they were required to by state contract, but they would never place a child with us, and that we'd be better off looking elsewhere. And of course, within a couple of years, this became public knowledge, and Catholic Charities in Massachusetts, which was the largest foster and adoption provider in our state, refused to continue to abide by non-discrimination laws in the state. The state refused to grant them a waiver, so they got out of the business of doing foster and adoptive care. I'm very happy to say that Becky and I were able to, we adopted 2 children, and we have in fact served as foster parents for either emergency or kinship over the past 18 years. So we wound up having a very positive experience, but have gone through exactly what this case was about. So I think, you know, this case certainly impacts the fate of many, many, many children. I mean, right now we know there are over 104,000 children in foster care all across the United States waiting for permanent homes. Many of those kids are housed in group homes because there aren't enough families, and clearly anything that discriminates in the foster care system restricts the options for stability and love for these kids. I thought that the conversation, as you said, Barbara, was engaging, it was respectful. I heard a lot in it. Three of the most important issues that I pulled out were, you know, the clear questions that have to be decided is one, does a government agency have the right to impose non-discrimination requirements on its contractors, even if they are religious organizations, if those non-discrimination requirements are seen as violating sincerely held religious belief? Secondly, and I think this is a very important trending topic for a number of cases we'll see before the Supreme Court and other courts in the coming months and years, is the state's compelling interest in protecting same-sex marriage as expressed in Obergefell equivalent to the compelling issues in preventing racial discrimination, for example, and other forms of discrimination? And the third major issue that I heard the justices struggling with was, how do you balance the public commitment of respect for religious belief and non-discrimination when the two come into conflict? I also saw that there was really clear recognition that this case goes way beyond the foster care system. And in fact, I believe it was Justice Alito who said that this would impact every government contract in all 50 states. I was also a little disturbed at how little the justices understood about the foster care system, as somebody who's been in and out of, you know, working with it closely for close to 20 years now. They didn't get some of the mechanics of the system and what best interest of the child means in terms of matching families and things like that. And I know the justices can't be content experts in everything, but I really hope they will do a lot of research into this, because I think some of these misunderstandings could lead to bad decisions. And finally, there was a lot, it was claimed very frequently during the arguments that no same-sex couple has ever applied to Catholic Social Services of Philadelphia. And that if they ever did, there are about 30 other foster care agencies within the city that they could be referred out to. And I had real problems with that argument, you know, for two reasons. One, I assume that it's not true that no same-sex couple has ever applied. I think that Catholic Social Services has been careful not to document that they've been approached by families that they consider unfit for whatever reason, whether it's same-sex or not married or single parent, you know, whatever, or Muslim or whatever, from a different faith. They may just not choose to ever accept and document those applications. And secondly, you know, to be referred out is a stigma. And it does do harm, and it does prevent barriers that mean that a government contractor is not treating all people equally. So that's sort of my quick takeaway of what I heard today, and very interested to hear what other respondents have to say.
Thanks, Marianne. Yeah, I was also quite not disturbed, but surprised that the fact that this issue of certification was sort of mixed up in the minds of some of the justices with the actual application of the fostering process, the contract between the child and the family. It seemed really surprising that they didn't have that sort of basic understanding. Naomi, how about you, coming from the city of Philadelphia? What was your takeaway?
Thanks, Barbara, and thank you to the task force. It's good to see you all. I want to give a little bit of a disclaimer too, that I live in Philadelphia and I am an employee of the city of Philadelphia. And so I want to say that for the next 50 minutes, I am Reverend Naomi Washington Leapart, a free agent, independent Christian minister who is Black, who is queer, who is woman, and deeply concerned about the implications of this case. I am not here as a representation of the city of Philadelphia or kind of our formal kind of perspectives, even though we were the city was the one in court today. I agree with all of what Marianne has described. This idea that you have options, right? That's the underlying, I say this out of the side of my neck, you have other options. And that absolves me from the responsibility I have to serve you as a member of this community. That absolves me from having to account for my actions or my treatment of you as a community, whether we're talking about the kids themselves or prospective parents. So I just thought this was an interesting argument coming from an institution and people who claim to be responding to a moral call, right? To claim that being in this business, to put it crassly, and seeking to make family with people who desire to be in family, these are acts of faith. These are our moral challenges that we accept. And at the same time, I can say to you, I don't have to serve you because you have other options. So I was just struck by the dissonance of those two perspectives. There was also a thread in the argument around the idea that, we don't serve them, and frankly, they don't want to be served by us. That was kind of underneath but we've never had anybody apply argument that these are not two communities that mix anyway. Religious folk, Catholic folk, pious folk, and LGBTQ folk. And so, again, I was struck by the irony of the fact that these arguments were made by an organization that is claiming I think, it was said 2 centuries old tradition of serving people. I too was struck by this teasing out of the nature of the relationship between Catholic Social Services and the city. I got caught up in the language. I felt like I wasn't prepared enough to really evaluate what I was hearing. But if you're a contractor versus a licensee versus an employee, that makes a difference in terms of whether I need to follow your non-discrimination rule. And again, it's the classic kind of theological loophole hunting, I think. Let's find a way to get around this and spiritually and more morally justify it. I actually thought there was a lot of anti-Blackness in the argumentation on the side of Catholic Social Services. I thought it was poking a couple of bears, right? One, that there is somehow a natural and consistent adversarial relationship between Black folk or folk who would be most protected around racial non-discrimination legislation and LGBT folk, as if Black people are not also queer. And I thought we were in dangerous waters when we were trying to tease out whether an interracial couple would also be turned away should there be a religious or moral basis for doing so. I wanted to say that's what we used to do. That's precisely what was legal, right? That people turned away folk rooted in some notion of a white superior God in whose image they were made, and everybody else is, needing to be saved, needing to be cleansed, needing to be made whole. That's exactly what we are emerging from, or I just thought that was an attempt to further wedge, right, rhetorically, right, because I don't think there's a practical wedge there, right? I'm Black and I'm queer and right? Further drive in and deepen the wedge between Black folk and LGBTQ folk. That this is what they're trying to do is say that racial discrimination is on the same level as LGBTQ discrimination, right? And we know that the discourses exist that attempt to paint that exact picture, that what LGBTQ people are trying to do is ultimately undermining to racial civil rights, right? The last thing I would say is, remember that point where it was raised that, and tell me if I misunderstood this, that Catholic Social Services had the opportunity to amend the contract or affirm a contract that stipulated that they could say, we don't endorse or affirm or support same-sex relationships, marriages, etc. And they refused to do so. I thought that was really interesting. Again, where are we at as a society, right? Where we have to write it in the contract that you actually believe that a certain group of the community shouldn't be affirmed and celebrated. You shouldn't experience all of the rights that everyone else experiences. So I just thought I was fascinated. So yeah, I'm looking forward to our continued conversation about this.
Thanks, Naomi. Yeah, I was also struck. I think it was Sonia Sotomayor who said that it's dangerous that a contractor with religious belief could exclude people with other religious beliefs, or people with disabilities or interracial couples. She was drawing the fact that this is going to have an impact far broader than just LGBT couples. So. Roland. Roland, by the way, is Executive Director of Umoja and leader of Inclusive Justice, and brings a great deal of wisdom to all of this conversation. And jump in, if you would, and give us your reactions to what so far you've heard and seen about this case.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that I'm very grateful is that both on the conservative and the progressive side of the court, that they understand how broad-reaching this decision can be. This is not just a local case or just a case involving one particular faith tradition, but this has the impact of impacting all of basically sectors of society. And so one of the things that I do and my contribution to this conversation is more so dealing with not with working with the Catholic Church per se, but the people within the Catholic Church. I've been very honored to be partnered with Marianne and with Frank from New Ways Ministry, and Families with Dignity here in Michigan, to engage in a series of conversations on how we can strengthen and educate the Catholic voice. That it's one thing for me to come along as a religious practitioner to speak about the impact of religious freedom or the lack thereof when it comes to these topics. It's quite another to strengthen the actual Catholic voice. And so that is one of the things that we have been engaged in with recently. The thing that I always find remarkable about these various cases when it comes to freedom of religion is this superiority of which religious conviction will you listen to? Which one has a longer history that thus here comes the Catholic Church. So obviously we have to listen to them. Well, again, what is the Catholic Church saying and doing, particularly in this case with Catholic Charities, to say, how is it that we can make sure all people are treated fair and equal? And so, again, not to bash the Catholic Church, that's not what this is about. But what this is doing is highlighting the children, the voices of the children, highlighting the parents, those who, again, are voiceless. One of the things that I do call this is a matter of spiritual violence. And you don't have to be a religious practitioner to engage in that. But if you want to say that my view is better than your view, and I have God to back me up, then I really believe that when you are shutting out someone else in the name of religion, that is seen as spiritual violence. And so as we are working with people within the pews and those Catholics who are wanting to be educated on this issue, the approach that I take is, like I said, one of really understanding what is spiritual violence and what is Christian dominionism, where we say that one particular view has been promoted that has crushed out all these other views. And so if indeed we're going to be, one nation under God that we love to refer to, how is it that we can make sure that truly all people are valued, all people are protected? And that is, I think, when you boil all of these arguments down, that is what freedom of religion should be, is that you have the right, you have the responsibility to not only have your religious conviction, but to make sure that that religious conviction does not impede on the freedoms of others. So I work for the Center for LGBTQ and Gender Studies, and that's in Berkeley, as well as with my colleague, Reverend Jacob Hero Shaw. And one of the things that and we're both ministers within the metropolitan community churches. And one of the things that we really want to make sure happens is that our voices aren't belittled, that people who we serve are also respected, that we have this whole, that we stand up for the human dignity of all individuals. And so I would say in this particular case, I would like to highlight how the people in the pew have power and authority that they may not even realize that they have. And that is one of the things that we're going to continue to uphold and uplift. I do want to say a couple other things. That one, when any faith organization, in this case Catholic Charities, is basically saying we want to provide public services, like in this case adoption, but we want to say who is in and who is out, then again, how is that showing any type of love or mercy to others? And so when you speak to people and really help get them on their religious sensibilities, I believe that is one of the ways that you can help turn the tide and help educate people, when you are able to help get to their religious sensibilities. And so in any case, I am hoping that my work and my partnership with DignityUSA and with New Ways Ministries can indeed strengthen that Catholic voice.
Thank you, Roland. That's wonderful. And I hope that works out. It's very important work that you're doing, and along with Dignity and New Ways.
Can I add one other piece? That also struck me, there was a whole lot of discussion of this notion of competing rights. And what really struck me is that what was absent from all of that conversation was the right of these children to stability, to love, to care, to permanency. That was totally left out of the picture. And I feel like that was such a huge mix. The Catholic Social Services people never brought it up. The city kind of hinted at it a couple of times, but it never kind of became the core. And I think that was a huge miss in terms of our jurisprudence and our faith conversation.
Right.
I think connected to that, though, is what the myth, and I think, Justice Thomas who sort of alluded to the fact that what might be most beneficial to the child is a cis-het couple, right? So it's the ability to focus on the child is constrained by the extent to which the person looking, right, the person evaluating that child's life is wrapping that up in a kind of prescriptive morality of the parents, right? That you really do believe that the sins of the father will be transmitted to the sins of the son, right? And so we best not allow these sinners to make family, right? And so, it struck me that wasn't core because we still won't yet admit, right, as a culture, that we do visit the sins. And then that depends on what we think is sinful, right? We visit the sins of the parent onto the child. And so, I also think that race too is there implicitly, right? We've got lots of transracial adoptions that go on in LGBTQ communities, right? A majority of the kids who are waiting to be placed, needing to be adopted, are kids of color. Predominantly, you got Black and brown kids, and so I felt like there was this completely, sometimes disrespectful and certainly messy way race was brought into the arguments around, which I think Victoria said in the chat, which of these is a more compelling interest, protecting which of these communities is a more compelling interest for the government. And then you had these other significant racialized conversations completely ignored.
I think it was Sonia Sotomayor that said CSS, Catholic Social Services, is a government contractor, and the government can use whatever legal qualifications it wants. And why are you different? And CSS responded, "You're forcing us to do something that offends our religious beliefs." But then the response to that was, "But you aren't forced to apply to be a government contractor."
That was one of those two snaps moments. I was fortunate to be watching it on Zoom with some other folks. we were going off, right? That was a clapback of all clapbacks, right?
Very true. And then the other part of that was that Catholic Social Services was arguing that it burdens their religious beliefs to even assess the homes of LGBT families for certification. Better to just bar them from eligibility for foster care services through their agency. So there was some really
if I may as well, because the comments that you just read really emphasize the points I was making in terms of spiritual violence and this whole idea of Christian dominionism, that those in religious authority really, feel like, we can't be touched, we can't be questioned. And we, in a sense, can deem who gets attention, who doesn't, who's in, who's out. And that is the pieces that I believe so many people just just don't even question, because it's, this religious authority. And it is up to us, the power to the people, to say, this is my life, I do matter, my voice does count, and to challenge those types of bedrock beliefs that are just simply based upon supremacy.
it was also interesting to hear Justice Thomas ask a number of questions, because he's been known to just not do any questioning during oral arguments, but he was really into it, some of which seemed to indicate a lack of understanding of process and what foster care was all about and what certification was all about. Any other thoughts that come to your mind? I mean, one of the things to do, obviously, is to have conversation about what we heard. And now the Supreme Court justices will go back and begin the decision process. What do we do with what we know and what our reactions are? And as people of faith, what do we do to respond to that in a way that's effective with, in other words, what actions are helpful at this point in time? Any reaction?
Well, I would say that even listen, not to speak for Marianne, but even listening to Marianne's story is compelling. And it is, I think that is the route to go, is to let's hear from those families that have been impacted. Let's, if possible, hear from the young people, both who have been left out and those who have been placed with their families, to highlight that, because this whole thing that this is, that LGBT queer folks are the others, is all we have is our voice. And when we use it, that helps quote unquote normalize our lives, our experiences, puts us all on the equal plane as well.
Okay. Other thoughts, Marianne? Do you have any suggestions or thoughts about what might be next steps?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that this case has just been way under the radar. Not that there aren't 6 million things and, just pressing justice issues throughout our country on like every front there possibly could be. But I think that, the fact that this case happened the day after the election, that there really hasn't been a lot of lead up to it, that, there has been an admitted reluctance within parts of the queer community to talk about families and kids, and, disinterest on the part of some power brokers within our community on the plight of foster kids, the fact that the foster community has very little political power and constituency. I mean, I think all of these things contribute to the fact that there's a lot of folks of goodwill who do not know that this case is out there and the dangers that it represents, certainly to the children, and as has been made clear, in terms of civil rights and equity across a whole range of communities. I mean, if we allow this sort of Christian nationalist perspective to dominate who is worthy of services or of participation in various parts of our culture, I mean, for me, that's what this case is really about. It's very much linked to this white supremacist Christian slice of our church that is very terrifying. So I think there needs to be a huge public education effort about this, and a lot of communication with people, particularly Catholics, but beyond that as well. I mean, we always cite that the Catholic bishops own these social service agencies that bring in millions and millions of dollars of federal money and state money and city money. And they have a vested interest in being able to keep these programs under their control. Catholics in the pews, or people who identify as Catholic, understand that service is much more important than this non-compliance with discrimination and protecting these dogmatic views that are held primarily by the clergy at this point. So there's a huge divide between our leadership and where we go. So I think everything that can be done to raise awareness of the issues in this case is really important, whether that's through op-eds, through seminars like this, through, email, social media memes, tweeting. I mean, I just think that there's so much ignorance around the full range of issues that exists here.
Very true. Very true. Well, one of the things that we wanted to do with today's gathering is to sort of open up the issue more. And then because we are recording it, it is available, and we probably need to do a better job of making sure that people who might have come to something like this today, but because of the aftermath of the election, and either they're busy doing other things around the election, or they're just trying to figure out what they want to do next, given the election, that we need to make sure that they have an opportunity to see and hear this. I know that a number of people I've been in touch with have said they would like to do this, but they had other commitments relative to the election that they had to be participants in. So we need to make sure that this is available and gets out to people. But you're right, there are lots of other ways we can tell that. I think the idea of the stories, yours, Marianne, and in my own situation, my wife and I many years ago were foster parents before I came out as trans. If I had done that early on, I probably would have been rejected. But I wasn't yet out, and we were foster parents to 13 children over the years, and it was a wonderful event for us, an amazing opportunity for our children to see have the foster children in our house. So those kinds of stories, but also the stories of the children themselves who have been through the foster care program need to be heard, and we have to do a better job of collecting those stories and making them available. We'll have to work out a strategy to make that happen. Naomi, do you have anything that you might want to add on to this?
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. I was thinking about two things when we think about next steps. I mean, I'm keyed into the way culture is this overwhelming force. What has been embedded into the culture makes its way to the court, right? Makes its way to the church. We're talking about a Christian context here. So the church. And I'm gonna suggest, I think, two cultural shifts we can attend to, right, in the wake of this case. It's interesting to me that in both Masterpiece and in this case, this notion of religious animus has been invoked to describe something, right? And we know that often it's a way to cloak critique, well-founded critique of bad theology, right? Well-founded critique of white Christian America. And so I wonder if we can simply say, yeah, I'm hostile to certain religious perspectives, and not let those who seek to include us determine the vocabulary and what the vocabulary means, right? So religious hostility, religious animus, I understand it to be kind of rooted in this legal toolbox, but it's also part of the popular conversation around religious freedom, that some religious communities are right now being victimized. They are sources of attack, recipients of attack, right? That's coded language designed to engender a kind of sympathy, right? But what if we, LGBTQ people who are also people of faith, said, no, hostility in the name of religion is different from trying to hold you accountable to a religious ideology that heals and not hurts, right? That's not hostility. I am opposed to bad theology, because I think bad theology, as Kevin Garcia might say, kills. Bad theology kills. And we can't be unafraid to say that. We can't be seduced by the both sides kind of patterns that we've seen over the last several years, this equivocation that happens, right? Well, there's a silver lining. Oh, but the church does so much good. Oh, but the church, no, that we got to call out bad theology and be willing to be called hostile towards religion. Because we know that religious hostility, right, is code vocabulary. It's a dog whistle. It points to something deeper that is attempting to silence us from well-founded and well-deserved critique, right? If not, I love, who said rebuke, right? So I think that's a cultural shift. And then I think we who are the ones who have been excluded and marginalized, we have to reject the argument that we have more options. I mean, I felt that because what it means is it reinforces that oppression is an option to which there are other options, right? It's this weird way that we kind of dig our heels in the notion that there should be some who are allowed to oppress and discriminate. Why? Because there are those who don't. And y'all can just go patronize those folk, right? When we were talking about Masterpiece, many folk were like, I don't understand, Naomi, why you're so upset. There are other bakeries, right? You can't get ordained in this tradition. Go ahead and get ordained in this other tradition. There are other options, right? I'm grateful for other options. I come from generations of folk who created other options. And that argument implies that oppression is an option that we are willing to accept. And I think the prophetic word that must come out of faith communities is discrimination is not an option that we accept at any level, under any circumstances, for any folk, right? At any time. So I think those are kind of cultural winds that we can blow back into this discourse. And that's regardless of what the Supreme Court ultimately decides in this case.
Very well said. Thank you. That's great. Other comments? Other thoughts?
Barbara, you may be saving this to the very end, but I'm going to go ahead and jump in. I just want to acknowledge Kathy Renna and another colleague of mine who is on right now, Roberta Scalar, who are media experts, and they are the ones who can listen and take various stories of hurt and harm or stories we want to highlight out in the media, whether they're Catholic voices or youth voices, people of color voices. And so I just really want to just highlight them as well, to say, if there's anyone who is on the recording now or who will listen to this recording later, I would encourage you to reach out to them, because they can really get those voices highlighted. I don't know if you want to put your contact information in the chat or not, but so folks can know how to reach you.
Good call out. I know that we have the blessing at the task force to have Kathy with us now for a period of time, and we're thrilled with the work that she's doing, and we obviously will seek her wisdom and her creative talent and her connections to take us further with this. Anything that people want to add, the panelists want to add as sort of a closeout to our time together? Marianne, do you have any final thoughts you want to leave with the group?
This is going to be very politically incorrect, but I think that the other danger I see lurking here is the right of the arrogance of religious institutions to think that they should be free of any kind of government oversight or public oversight or accountability. And speaking as a Catholic who has lived through decades of sex abuse crisis, I think that has particular relevance in this case. And, you know, we kind of need to just put back that you don't get the last word on this. You know, I was so annoyed every time they pointed to this 200-year tradition or 2 centuries of service that Catholic social services has provided in terms of caring for, you know, the widows and orphans kind of thing. Say, you know what, there's a reason that the state and the cities have stepped in and taken some of this over. We need to protect our vulnerable citizens, and I think that's something that all people of faith agree on. So accountability is really important, and we the people have a right to oversee these institutions.
Naomi, do you have any final thoughts?
Well, you know, one of the things I'm saying all the time, it seems like in every sermon now, I certainly say it in the classroom where I teach all the time, theology students, I tell them that theology props up action and that ideas have material consequences, right? And so whenever we want to make room for bad ideas, make room for limited barbaric theologies, we got to know that we're also making room for bad actions and limited and barbaric policies, you know, material realities. And, you know, that's why it behooves us to speak theologically back into the moment and not only seek to intervene in terms of kind of the legality of it. Because I think that's an incomplete revolution when the legalities are always propped up by ideas and theologies. Ideas about ourselves, ideas about society, and ideas about God, ideas about the divine, the transcendent, right? And so we got to remember that as we move forward and continue to speak. You know, the policy wonks don't corner the market on this conversation either. There are LGBTQ people and LGBTQ people of faith who can, I think, profoundly weigh in to help us live into the best of ourselves.
Are there any comments or responses from any people who are watching this? You can sort of indicate in the chat that you want to say something.
I know I can't add to what my sisters have already said, but I guess my final comment is go Blue Michigan.
I have Sabrina Dent. You want to?
Yes, I wanted to weigh in and say this was a very rich and powerful discussion that needed to happen. And I agree with what Marianne said. There needs to be public education about this case and about these things that are happening, because like the general public sometimes have no awareness of what is taking place. And so education must happen. And as Reverend Stringfellow said, these stories need to be told. They need to be amplified. So then that's a part of the education. But Reverend Naomi, what you said about being honest about like religious hostility and being able to state that, I think is so important, because discrimination by any means is not acceptable. And so what I heard through listening to the oral arguments today, I heard a lot of hostility, and that needs to be addressed. And so that should not come at the expense of anyone. Our human dignity and our humanity is so important. So I really look forward to actually seeing the next steps happen, just not a conversation about it, but actually seeing the next steps take place. And just know that I'm willing to be a part of that happening, because this is a call to action. This call right here should be a call to action for those that are committed to doing the work. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
This is Diego Sanchez. I'm a visitor and I'm honored. Part of the Teeth family with Jacob and Naomi. I have a question, and I'm asking it honest. Sometimes I ask questions because I think I know the answer. I'm asking this one because I know that I don't. And Reverend Stringfellow, I had the great pleasure of being on the call that you had last week, where you talked about, where it's about Catholicism, which I thought was a great precursor to being here. And the link is available if anybody missed it. Find BKY and you can listen to it at work. My question is, during that talk, there was a discussion about the Catholic faith feeling that you can love the sinner past the sin, and that you can embrace the body, well, the person without embracing actions by the person. I'm wondering, in a faith conversation, whether there's conflict or support along that line of thinking with the Catholic services folks. Like, where does it fit in that construct, or does it?
Thank you for bringing that up. I'm also going to say, Marianne, kind of be ready to follow my comments, being a practicing Catholic. But one of the things that I wanted to go deeper into in that conversation is, on one hand, we're talking about freedom of religion, but then there's also this concept of religious authority. And I kind of said it in my comments today, especially with Pope Francis's, comments a couple of weeks ago of, and what then do we do, but particularly if you're Catholic, when the religious authority has said something that the masses haven't, necessarily adopted, meaning the bishops, referring to them. And, to me, it comes back to this whole concept of, I would say, the love of the law versus the letter of the law. Meaning, when people say, "Oh, I have to follow, what's in the scripture, or I have to follow what the, church doctrines or whatever," you can get caught up in the letter of the law. But the love of the law is the reason why the law exists in the first place, is you are to serve and uphold and love and protect other people. That's the love. And so you really need to make a distinction between those two, because if indeed your law hurts or harms someone else, then I believe you are practicing a legalistic religion. And it really does not serve anybody except the powerful and the privileged. And so if you want to make religion practical, that really benefits people, not put them in submission, then you really need to focus on that love concept that is found, that's the reason why, quote unquote, the law exists. And that's why we as here in America challenged the US Constitution that said, enslaved Americans were 3/5 of a person. Well, that was the law, but it's like, but that's not who I am. I know I am a full person, in the eyes of God. So thus I have the right and the authority to challenge any type of law that's going to diminish my humanity. And that brings us right back to this case here today, that just because this religious authority, the Catholic Charities, says that, our law said this, but is it harming anyone? Is it shutting anyone out? If it is, it's bad theology, as Naomi said. It's wrong, it's harmful, it's hurtful. And thus you should not side on any law that's going to shut anyone else out.
I want to just say a bit in response to what Reverend Roland just said, because I think it's so on time. And I teach at 5 Eastern. So I'm going to say this and run. So I'm going to say my goodbye before I say this. You know, I think what's tricky about saying the law is a medium for our love or a medium for the gospel, right? Is that we're not all, you know, my gospel ain't that gospel. You know, the good news for me, right, might actually be bad news for you. If you have been steeped and shaped and luxuriated in privilege, in arrogance, in mythologies about who you are and who I am, right? My good news is going to be bad news for you, right? And so, you know, we come back to then what people have determined are theological disagreements, right? That should just be allowed to sit on the same table, having equal weight and value in the discourse, right? And I come back to saying, no, we do not equally weigh and value opposing perspectives when one perspective would contribute to, as you say, Reverend Roland, the diminishment of my humanity, right? That is not a perspective that we should value. If we are who we say we are.
I'm sorry. Theological disagreement should never be enshrined in law. If it becomes law, then again, it should not be. And that's what we need to change.
Yeah. So I'm really interested in our pursuing this notion of, to what extent should the law reflect a particular kind of gospel, which opens the door then for, as you say, Reverend Roland, the folks with the most resource who can then claim the most authority in a society like ours to say, well, this is the only gospel that matters. So our law must be connected to amplifying this gospel, right? So I'm just so grateful to still be in this conversation, having done some work around this particular idea of religious liberty and religious freedom when I was at the task force, and now living in Philadelphia, which is at the center of this case. So thank you so much, Barbara and others at the task force, for having me. I'm going to hop off so I can go be with these theology students.
Go teach.
Thanks, Naomi.
And
I'll just add, yeah, I think Naomi and Roland really articulated stuff so well. And I just want to add, you know, I think Catholicism gets a lot of the focus for this issue of conflicting theology, but I think it really permeates many faith traditions. You know, this sense that the sort of heteronormativity or the complementarity theory, or, you know, God created male and female and said, go, you know, fill the earth, and all of that, you know, really does create bad theology. And until we can eliminate all of that theology that says that anybody who is gay or lesbian or genderqueer or not in a heterosexual marriage that produces children, or all those sort of normative things that so many cultures are based on, you know, it does do damage. And it brings us to, you know, the gay-free zones in Poland, and to folks not being able to access appropriate medical care, and kids not being seen as being in safe space when they're with same-sex parents or with gender-queer parents or whatever. You know, recognizing and eliminating that theology underlies all of this.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Naomi. Thank you, Roland. Thank you, Marianne. Victoria, did you have your hand up?
Yes. There's one quick thing that I wanted to share with folks. Diego shared some resources around the Pope's comments. We put out a statement this morning ahead of the oral arguments calling for Catholic Social Services to actually withdraw their case in light of the Pope's comments, because particularly zeroing in on the comments around the LGBTQ community's right to build a family, and the idea that if this is what the leader of, your religion is saying, then it calls the question whether this is really about religious beliefs or if it's really about bigotry, prejudice, and bias, using religion as your escape route. And so that's the statement that we pushed out this morning. There's going to be some follow-up around engaging with partners to continue to push this narrative that this isn't that this is about bias and prejudice. It's not about faith or religion, and really making that clear through the voices of LGBTQ people of faith and people of faith who are our allies. So you already heard mention of op-eds and sharing of stories, but there's also actions that other organizations are starting to try to organize and figure out, and also some pledges, pledge campaigns for folks to be able to sign on, do petition, that kind of thing, to really show the scale of where people of faith are in this country, that it's more than just the statistic from PRRI, that a majority of people of faith from all faiths support LGBTQ equality and are against exemptions, but that those numbers have people, real people's faces behind them that are from a number of denominations and no denomination at all for our secular, atheist, humanist friends as well. So know that those things are happening. We decided not to share a little bit more detail about that yet, because I know our partners are still kind of in the earlier planning stages around it. But stay tuned, there will be more to come. The same listservs that you all received this invitation on will also be receiving follow-up information about this as things get kind of sewn up. So definitely please stay tuned. We really do think that there is an opportunity, particularly with Catholics in this country, and we're so grateful to Marianne's leadership and Dignity's leadership over the years, and really being able to drive a narrative for a long time, not just now, around where U.S. Catholics are on this issue. And I think one of the statistics I saw said like 76%. It was in the 70s, high 70s of Catholics, lay Catholics who are, who see this as a non-issue. So the question again is, who are they really fighting for, and whose beliefs are they really standing up for? Because it's not biblical, and the leader of their entire faith is standing with where the majority of U.S. Catholics are on this issue. And that's a narrative that we want to be able to help continue to highlight and amplify, to really make this case seem as unnecessary as it really is. And would love for you all in your various spheres of influence, as you hear about these opportunities to organize, from this faith lens, to join in.
Thank you, Victoria, for wrapping that up. That's really helpful. And thank you, panelists, and thank you, audience, for joining in. This has been a really exciting conversation, and we will be providing more background and getting this recording out so others can have a chance to see it, respond to it. And we will see about offering some ways in which they can directly respond. So on behalf of the task force, I want to first say thank you to MCC Tampa for providing this space. And I would alert people to the fact that every Wednesday at this time, we have a program for faith leaders to just come and talk about, quote, how are you doing? It's a sort of a therapy group without a therapist. It's an opportunity for faith leaders to just talk about how what's going on now is having an impact on them personally. And come join us. The contact information goes out through the Welcoming Church Program Leaders, the National Religious Leadership Roundtable, the Trans Seminary and Cohort Alumni Group. So if you're looking for an opportunity to just talk about how things are in your life with the pandemic and the elections pre and post, come join us on a Wednesday afternoon. So on behalf of the task force, I will say thank you so much for being with us, and thank you, panelists, for an exciting conversation, revealing conversation, and an action-directed conversation.